I'm happy to introduce Lois and Gunther today. Lois is an author, motivational speaker, adventurer, photographer, circumnavigator. She has reimagined and reinvented her life several times. And what's also fun for me, since I've known Lois for a number of years, and Gunther quite some years as well, is they're great people. So not only are they adventurers and accomplished, they're just really awesome. And Gunther just was sharing too that a good friend of his is the Rotary president in Maui. So yeah, Josie, maybe we need to go there. Yes. Anyway, embarking on an 8-year adventure at sea, Lois, the entrepreneur and former CEO, discovered higher highs and lower lows than the roller coaster world that she came from. Sailing around the world on a 43-foot catamaran propelled her out of the intense fields of human genomics and biomedical technology into the thrills, dangers, and bliss of the cruising life. As she shares her passions with others, she inspires them to fulfill their own dreams, whatever they may be. When not traveling, Lois and Gunther live in San Diego, and for the summers they are in Wisconsin. Lois actually grew up in St. Croix Falls and worked for several years in Minneapolis before moving to California. She worked in advertising, marketing, computer, and medical devices. And in 1990, she moved to San Diego and she became CEO of Genetronics Biomedical and took the company public on the American Stock Exchange. So Lois is here to share with us about her third book, The Long Way Back. And there's a copy on every table. And it's a fascinating book. All of her books are just captivating and beautiful. And if you're like some people that I know well that aren't necessarily big readers, it doesn't matter because you can look at the pictures. And the photos alone are just magnificent. So I encourage you to take a look at the book. And she does have all 3 of the trilogy here with her today. Anyway, it's a gripping conclusion to the grand adventure that took them over 34,000 miles around the world on the 43-foot catamaran. Filled with dangers, exotic cultures, and unexpected delights, this book completes the trilogy that began with what was called Maiden Voyage. That's the first book, and continues with Sailing the South Pacific, which was book 2, and then this book. I already mentioned the great photos and riveting stories. There's some stories I still remember, and I tell other people from the first 2 books. So I think that's most of it. Also, Gunther came along today, and a little background on Gunther, other than the fact that he's good at hauling books around, is that he is here to help answer questions and will be available as well. He is a PhD physicist and founder of BTX, which grew to become Genetronics Biomedical. He was the chair and chief scientific officer, and Lois was president and CEO when they took the company public in 1999. And at that point, they also ordered a boat, and that boat was made in the south of France, and they took off and began their sailing the fall of 2000. This is a fun little ending before Lois comes up. Gunther was the captain of their catamaran, Pacific Bliss, and she was the navigator. And she says, so he ran the ship, and I told him where to go.
Thank you very much. I came from an area in Wisconsin called Cushing, Wisconsin, and I graduated from St. Croix Falls in the class of 1960, for those of you who want a little bit of my Wisconsin background, because now people are asking, oh, you've got this house in Wisconsin, how did that come about? Well, I was a Wisconsin girl from way back. My childhood dreams were to be a teacher and travel and write during summers and holidays. So the teaching was just a way to make some money. Well, life, marriage, and 2 children interrupted that, and I ended up with a very long business career in Minneapolis and St. Paul, including Medtronic, my own medical advertising agency, Control Data, a whole variety of companies, and then I ended up in San Diego, and a year later I met Gunther, and then you know the rest of that story. We formed a partnership, took our company public, and went off to sail the world. Now Gunter and I spend summers in Polk County, and we still spend winters in San Diego because we're wimps. And those of you who have been to my previous book presentations are familiar with the routine where I usually show slides, pretty places, and I spin sailors' tales. And with the publication of my third book and the fact that I have also been here twice before, I'm departing today from that routine. I realize that the slides I would have shown you are all contained in the book. So I put the book on the table, and hopefully you've passed it around. And if you haven't, you can pass around and look at the pictures later. I basically wanted to read a few passages in the book, and you can follow along if you wish. And because this book ends the series, and you're my friends, I've been here before, you know me now, what I want to do instead of showing pictures is to describe exactly how we felt as we completed our final voyage, what we learned, and then how we changed as a result. As Paul Thoreau said in his book, Dark Star Safari, you go away for a long time and return a different person. You never come all the way back. And that's the quote that inspired me to name my third book, released last fall in San Diego, called The Long Way Back. When we left San Diego to fly to France, where our 43-foot catamaran Pacific Bliss was being built, we were eager for adventure, and then we also wanted these moments of bliss. But the fact of it is, despite our corporate career and what Becky told you about us, after we took the company public and had been there a couple years, we found out everyone wanted a little piece of us, and pretty soon, you know, we're working 24/7 and never a day off, never anything else to our lives. And we also felt the corporate world had let us down in a way, and we were ready to retire and escape. Gunter was already 65, so it wasn't such a big deal to leave. I was 58 at the time. So here's what we thought. We thought we would control our own destiny. We would be free as independent as eagles soaring in the sky. We would sail with the wind, and when that wasn't blowing, we had 8 solar panels to store energy in our battery bank. We would be our own self-contained municipality with a water maker to convert seawater to fresh and high-tech communication and navigation systems. And, best of all, we would have no board of directors, shareholders, or stakeholders telling us what to do. Now, you all know the story. Man gets woman, or sometimes women gets man, or woman gets man, hopefully it's one, and the two of them sail off into the sunset together. The end. They don't tell you what comes after. For us, sailing off in the year 2000 into that sunset, heading west, was just the beginning. Maiden Voyage was the first book in the trilogy. That takes us about 1/3 of the way around the world in just over 1 year, from France across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, and then bashing north to San Diego. The biggest lesson we learned during that maiden voyage is this: we are not in control. God is. My story called Force 10, about the storm that hit us off the coast of Venezuela and Colombia, South America, won first place in the Solis Travel Award for the best story at sea. Force 10, if you aren't familiar with force levels, you go 1 all the way through 10. If you would go 11 and then 12, force 12 is a hurricane. And a 43-foot catamaran like ours does not survive force 12, hurricane. The book won first place travel in the San Diego Book Awards, and that is in the prologue. The beginning of that story is in the prologue of the book, and if you've read that book, hopefully it propels you into reading the entire book and how we got into that predicament in the first place. During the next third of our voyage around the world, we sailed straight from San Diego south to the Marquesas Island, taking 21 days without the sight of land. And then we continued on through the South Pacific for a 2-year period until we reached the east coast of Australia. Most of our time in the South Pacific was idyllic, but there were many frustrating periods when Gunther had to manage boat breakdowns, often with no marina services within hundreds of miles. Now, Becky said that he's a physicist, but he didn't know he was going to have to be the chief boat mechanic, especially with a new boat. But that's what happens on a high-tech boat. Saltwater and electricity just don't mix. We learned to be flexible and go with the flow in the South Pacific, and wherever the wind wanted to take us, if we wanted to go north and the wind was blowing and heading us south, we would just go that direction. So we were pretty easygoing, going with the flow during that part of our voyage. The book, Sailing the South Pacific, also won first place travel in the San Diego Book Awards. One thing that we ended up telling our friends and crew who joined us is Pacific Bliss, and that was the name of our boat, is not a plane, not a train. You can pick the date or the place, but not both. Our primary concern was safety, not getting into another storm. So we made that very clear. That was primary. And so that's a fast romp through the first 2 books, and that brings me to the 3rd book of the trilogy that was released last fall, The Long Way Back. The last third of the world took us 4 years to complete out of the total of 8 years we were gone sailing. And it took us all the way from Bundaberg, Australia, north across the top of Australia to Darwin, throughout the Indonesian islands to Bali, north to Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, then across the Indian Ocean to Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Yemen, back up the Red Sea to Eritrea, Sudan, Egypt, through the Suez Canal to the Eastern Med, Israel, Turkey, and then continuing on through Greece, Italy, and back to France, which completed the circle. All of that is covered in The Long Way Back. I can only give you a snippet of what's covered totally, so I'm going to focus today on only one emotion we experienced of all the emotions, and that emotion is fear. And the object of that fear, pirates. We first encountered fear in the Malacca Straits, and I want to tell you that story first. It's an area of the world where pirates have been lurking for centuries. They attack a 650-mile stretch that borders Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And the UN declared this area the most dangerous for pirates in the entire world. As recently as 2014, there were 4 major attacks in broad daylight. Yet 1/3 of the world's shipping moves through those straits. In 2013, there were 125 attacks, triple that of 2009, and I don't have a real recent statistic on that. I'm sure it's still up there. We had a very big scare during our own passage through that area from Bali to Singapore. It was our 5th day at sea with only 1 crew, Noan, a Singaporean, and we're sailing along with our buddy boat, Simpatica, having a blast. They're sailing right alongside us, and they turn up their sound system, and the crew of both boats are singing and dancing together. It was a moment of bliss, pure joy. And here's what happens next. On page 122, I will read it for you. Okay, after pure joy, on page 122 of The Long Way Back, Wences turns up their sound system and plays Latin songs. Belle dances on their trampoline with Dios, their 2-year-old. Soon the crews of both yachts are dancing to the music that blares from Simpatica's speakers. It's a contest. Each crew attempts to outdo the other. No one takes the prize, performing the chicken and monkey dances while balancing on the cabin roof of Pacific Bliss. Our captain is flying high. After days of motor sailing, he worried about fuel consumption. But if this wind speed and direction continues, he believes that he can shepherd Simpatica straight through to Singapore without stopping for fuel, I should explain here that Simpatica was our buddy boat, and the reason we were shepherding them is they had lost one of their sail drives in an accident hitting a reef, and they needed to go with a buddy boat that could go right alongside them all the way through that strait and to Singapore. Suddenly, I noticed a humongous fishing boat heading diagonally toward our starboard. Gunther at the helm speeds up to make sure she will clear our stern with plenty of room to spare. On her current course, she will most likely pass behind our stern, ahead of Simpatica, who is following behind. As she comes closer, we take note that she has a weather-beaten wooden hull with a freeboard twice the size of ours. She passes close to our stern and then turns to our port side. 3 grungy-looking men on board motion toward us, holding out a red jerry can. Concerned, I shake Noah out of his afternoon nap. He stumbles topsides. They want diesel, he mumbles sleepily. That's the one thing we're short of, Gunther says, frowning. They say they only need 10 liters. Maybe we can give them 5 and Simpatica can give them the other 5. Noah, tell them to go to Simpatica first while I think about this. Noah shouts Gunther's order and the boat heads towards Simpatica. Wences doesn't want them coming too close and denting his gorgeous yacht. He ties a 25-liter can of diesel to a dock line and throws it overboard. Smart. The vessel picks it up with a fishing hook. Then it turns and lumbers on the southwestern course. They say they're headed to Jakarta, no one explains. Strange, I think out loud. With only 25 liters of fuel, they won't get far. They probably plan to keep stopping boats to get more, he says. I would think they'd head to Biomedical to fill up. Suddenly, the boat turns and heads back to Pacific Bliss. What on earth? I begin. Let's hope they just want to return the jerry can, Gunther says. I'm not convinced. The can belongs to Simpatica, and they know it. So I'm wondering, why are they coming to us? Now Gunther suspects they might have other motives. He loads a cartridge into the flare gun that we keep handy. The boat almost touches our stern. Don't show the gun, Noah cautions. Back on Simpatica, tension rises. To them, it looks as if the men are going to board Pacific Bliss. By way of VHF, Wences tells us, if these guys are on the up and up, why didn't they do something friendly, like offer us some fish in return for the diesel? Maybe they're not fishermen after all, but pirates. The boat has no name painted on the hull, only a license. We're copying that. Wences asks Bell, do we know any officials in Indonesia? I met the mayor of Kupang, she says, but he would be too busy at his office. Maybe his wife. She's so nice. I have her home phone number. Bell calls her. The mayor's wife tells her it would take too long for a Navy ship to get there. Maybe a helicopter, Bell suggests to her. I'll wait by my phone for word from you. The mayor's wife calls Jakarta to be on standby. No one yells to the boat, what do you want? The man comes to the bow and yells back in Indonesian. No one turns to Gunther, his face filled with relief. They want motor oil instead. Gunther grins. That we have. He climbs down into the engine room and returns with a full can. Do not let them raft up, he says, handing the can to Noah, who ties it to a lawn dock line. Then, standing at the starboard helm seat, Noah heaves the can onto the boat's deck. Good job, Gunther shouts. But the boat still doesn't leave. To our surprise, the fishermen hoist Simpatica's 25-liter jerry can over the side and drop it into the sea. We pick it up with our boat hook. It's full. They're returning the diesel. They really did want engine oil. The 3 men on board are all smiles on now, waving and yelling thank you in Indonesian. The vessel turns around, this time for good, and heads southwest. We all exhale a huge sigh of relief. That incident passed away quickly. We were too busy navigating the Singapore Strait to even think about it. But what remained was the fear that takes hold down deep. One moment, having a blast. The next, attack. So by the time we got to Thailand, we came to a personal crisis of the worst kind, one that affected Gunter's and my relationship, which had also always been pretty strong. You would not be surprised to hear that many couples split during a world circumnavigation. There are many reasons: health issues, family issues, aging parents, financial problems, cruiser burnout, you name it. The sea tests every part of one's soul. But the most common reason that one partner wants to continue and the other one does not. Gunter often threatened to quit. "I'm going to sell this bucket," he said many times when things went wrong. And I said it all as well, but we didn't really mean it. However, this time it was different. Gunter wanted to stay in Thailand, perhaps buy or rent a home on land, and also sail around that area. I felt that if we stopped, we'd never continue. And for sure, we'd never complete our circumnavigation. And I'm someone who really wants to finish what I begin. And one factor with Gunter was a constant need to fix the boat, and I understand that. The boat was very safe, quite high tech. Even with a new boat, though, there's lots of issues. But there was another factor, and that was, I realized, an unspoken fear. So I titled this chapter in the book, Crisis in Thailand. And the chapter begins with a quote by George Adair: "Everything you've wanted is on the other side of fear." So, what lies on the other side of Thailand and the Indian Ocean we would have to cross? Well, Salalah, Oman, and then a 550-mile passage through the dreaded Pirate Alley, where they not only robbed boats, but kidnapped or killed the owners. We'd end the passage in Aden, Yemen. Yeah, that Aden, Yemen, where the USS Cole was bombed. I was still determined to complete our mission, and we'd both been very goal-oriented in our business, and I expected that to continue. But it seemed to me at that time that Gunter was turning more into a go-with-the-flow, what I call a river person, and I wondered whether he learned that lesson in the sailing in the South Pacific too well. You know, the one I told you about flexibility and going with the flow. But one thing we realized that always helped us in the past was to research a problem and then talk it through. And I had stacks of folders about Pirate Alley. So we're sitting on the boat, we pull them out, I read through them, and Gunter reads through them, and there was one particular story that we both read that stuck out, and it proved that sailors are no wussies. That story took place between Somalia and Yemen on March 28, 2005. Mahdi, a 45 steel cutter, and Gandalf, a heavy 47-foot cement boat, sailed toward the Yemeni port of Aden, running without lights on a moonless night. Two high-speed open boats with 4 men on each sped toward the sailboats. Mahdi and Gandalf closed ranks. At 200 yards, the pirates swerved, one toward Mahdi and the other one toward Gandalf. Because what they try to do is, if you've got two boats going like this, what they want to do is come between you and separate them off, much like animals, would do in the wild. At 200 yards, the pirates swerved, and one went toward either way. And then at about 50 yards, the pirates began to shoot, first at the side of the boats and then into their cockpits. Captain Ron Nolan of Mahdi told his wife, "Steer with your feet and keep your head down below the cockpit, so if they shoot, at least it's not your head." So that's how serious it was, and she did that. He went down below, and he assembled the shotgun that he'd stowed underneath the floorboards, and he came right up on deck firing at the pirates. Meanwhile, Gandalf, the cement boat, turned 90 degrees, rammed the other wooden attack boat, slicing it in two. So by the time the merchant ship had responded to their mayday calls, all of the pirates, every single one of them, was floating in the chop. The ship hung with them until well after dark. Obviously, they all drowned. And Gunter and I discussed that whole event. I mean, it was really good that they confounded the pirates, but what did they do in the beginning that might help us in going through that area that we could learn from the story? First of all, they sailed through the danger zone as buddy boats, and they should have formed a convoy. To their credit, they had originally had a group of 4, but one stayed behind to help the other one with engine problems. And then these 2 had gone ahead. So now you've got 4 boats, you're down to 2 and 2. Not good. They failed to keep radio silence, probably alerted the pirates to with their VHF chatter about the engine issues. Reportedly, a longboat had approached Gandalf early in that day, most likely a scout, and most likely because they'd heard that VHF chatter. So after our research, we made notes. First thing, Gunter said, we won't be packing heat like they did, Gunter said, but we did have flares on board. I wanted to hire a gunboat with AK-47s, but that was probably a pipe dream. We decided, though, that we would form a convoy with at least 5 yachts, and we did not plan to run without lights. We feared that we'd hit each other and have a big mess of sailboats. But we did plan to maintain radio silence, except for using codes to communicate our positions. And to communicate those codes and come on the air, we would say switch, switch, or change, change. We moved on from research to developing a plan, and its implementation began right there in Thailand. Patrick Murphy, a fun-loving Irishman and a highly competent sailor, would be our convoy leader, and he wanted me to be his assistant. We began our transit of the Indian Ocean the following January, and by March 9th, 2007, we are transiting Pirate Alley, that very same stretch they had gone through. Part of that story is in the prologue, and I will read that to you now. The prologue, Braving Pirate Alley, off the coast of Oman, March 9th, 2007. The VHF crackles. This is Coalition Warship number 48. Please report to us any suspicious activity or vessels in your area. This is not the first time I've heard this announcement. I'm used to it by now. I leave the nav station in the salon and return to the cockpit of Pacific Bliss. Look up, Chris points. A stark white drone circles high above our convoy, sleek as a spook, silent as a spook, actually. We would never have noticed it had not Chris, our 24-year-old Aussie crew, pointed it out. Mesmerized, we strain our necks as it circles again. Okay. Right above our mast, soaring like a giant albatross. Then it banks and soars upward into the fleecy clouds covering the Gulf of Aden. Eerie, eerie, eyes in the sky, I whisper, as if it can hear. Must be from the warship, Gunter says, checking us out. The 3 of us sit silently, immersed in our thoughts. The incident reminds me that despite the calm seas, this is no ordinary passage. When you're getting ready to brave Pirate Alley, you want to do it with sailors whom you can trust with your lives. That's why my husband Gunter and I formed the Camel Convoy along with 4 other sailing yachts, all on the same mission, to travel safely from Salalah, Oman to Aden, Yemen. And then I talk about how the attacks are increasing and so on. And Chris then says he's bored. And I say, it's getting to all of us. I too am bored, yet tense. I am living of that definition of sailing I never understood till now. 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror. Like a volunteer fireman hanging around the station. I don't want the fire to come, yet I'm fascinated by the thought that it could. I don't blame you for being bored, I agree. Then we discuss it and we chat, and then Chris says, I do miss the lack of chatter we've had before. The entire world is here on red alert. It pervades the airwaves. It invades our psyches. It is buried deep within our bones. The guys on the commercial ships, the captains of our sailing yachts, and most certainly the troops on the coalition ship, all are posed for action. Bottled up energy bounces against some invisible shield with no place to go. And yet in our world, aboard Pacific Bliss, thank God, nothing is happening. And then I want to close with what we learned. So what did we learn during that final third of the world? We learned that while it's good to be flexible, setting a goal and finally achieving it gives one a sense of accomplishment that can last a lifetime. And I'd like to close by saying that Gunther and I never regretted the decision we made to sail around the world. And now in the process of promoting this trilogy, we're able to relive it again with you. It's like going around the second time. So we really feel blessed. Thank you so much for allowing us to share our experience with you. And we want to wish you well as you pursue your own passions, live your own dreams, and encourage your children and your grandchildren to do the same. And now Gunther would like to come up and we can take some questions. Do we have time for a few? Sure. Okay.
Are there questions from the audience for Lois and Gunther?
Yes, Becky.
Was it this part or the other segment during the type of tsunami? And you wanted to-
Tsunami hit 1 year before we arrived in Thailand. So
you wanted to
missed
talk
it.
about how you missed it?
Well, I think we missed it.
We missed it.
Luckily, because we want to stay one more year in
We saw
Langkawi.
the after effects of
Yes.
Paul?
We just had a friend that's been out for 20 years on a boat and sailing all over. They use a lot of amateur radio. Did you use amateur radio at all?
Well, yes, no, we used a single sideband radio, which is not amateur, but it's available to anybody who wants to use it. And you connect to stations on land. They also allow you to send short emails called sail mails to the land boats. So, and then we have VHF, which is a range of only 20 miles or so.
Good. Any final questions for our presenters?
Yes?
What was the most challenging weather conditions that you experienced?
The most challenging was danger-wise was dense storm off the coast of Colombia, and we were pretty new on the boat, only half a year, so we were not sure if we were in a survival situation or not. But then I remember there were waves very, very bigger than the ceiling here, and the winds was about 60 knots, 60 miles an hour. So I remember that the founder of Katana, the builder of the boat, told me that it's really, when it's getting very bad, go downwind, go with the waves, go with the wind, because this reduces the apparent wind. And as long as you have enough sea room, if you have about 25 sea room before you hit land, so we survived by going just downwind. The big danger is if you go with the waves go up, but you don't want to go too fast down the waves, because if you go down too fast, you hit the back of the prior wave and you're in danger of pitch falling. So you have to be a little bit careful balancing your speed. And the biggest speed we had was about 25 miles an hour, which is very fast in a sailboat. Now, that was dangerous, but most annoying was sometimes we had 1 week, nothing but one squall after the other, and rain, squalls. It was miserable. I remember the transit from Tahiti to Aitutaki, the Cook Islands. We spent 1 week without brushing teeth. We just standing watch for relicas and went down, slept for 3 hours, standing watch again. So that was misery.
Final question?
What part or systems on the boat created the most problems for you?
All the electrical systems. A number of times, for example, in the middle of the night, everything went blank, no more electricity on board. And I had to really troubleshoot very quickly what happened. Mostly it was a fuse. But we had circuit boards where there was a leak in the ceiling, there was seawater dripping in, they were corroding the circuit boards, we had to bypass the circuit board with simple switches, so this was the main problem. But mechanically, the boat was perfect. It was very solid, made out of Kevlar, no problem.
Well, we thank you for being our featured presenters for today. And